And is it fine with you for this view of camera? Is it good?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Okay, so then ask them to connect and then.
Yep. So here's one of them.
Okay, great. And you know how to share your screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you so much. Awesome. And then, yeah, so I can just move the PowerPoint forward on here. Then I don't need to click. Okay.
Or with the mouse.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Always helpful. And then.
Just one. I think never
Okay. I'm gonna slide awesome.
I have your water. Okay. I just need to get one.
Are y'all here for the addressing equity? Yeah. Perfect. We have handouts. Yep. Are you gonna stay for the addressing equity? Perfect. Awesome. Oh. There we go.
Good, yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh. That's not, how are you? Good. Yes. Okay. Mhm.
Recording in progress.
Okay, let's see. One, two,
Recording in progress.
mhm. Uh, oh, sorry, I need to leave. My presenter, one of them's here. Fantastic. We're just trying to get the other person here. Leah, can you hear us? Awesome.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Perfect.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes. Yes. Nope. We just need our other presenter to be able to access the Zoom. So, yes. Mhm. Meeting info. Ugh, this is going to be rough. Okay. Um, Perfect. Okay, Amy, are you able to hear me? Oh, I'll let you get set up. Sorry.
All right, I'm good.
Awesome, and we can hear you too. So, I'm gonna.
Thanks for your patience. Apologies.
Oh, you're good. I'm gonna add pins to both of you just in case. And we're gonna give folks a couple more minutes. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes, and I'll watch the chat. And I've got the link ready to post. So
Awesome. Perfect. And yeah, just let me know when you want me to move forward the slides. I'll try to guess, but you never know. So
no, that's
awesome.
totally.
Are you attending?
No, I'm just
Okay,
looking at
cool.
some-
You're good.
I
Thanks.
I might fit.
No
Sorry, that's
problem.
something-
Oh, that's perfect. So, and I might.
Yeah.
Welcome, Tino. Great to see you virtually. Just gonna put some of these around for folks.
I'm going out for the number. Oh. Well, I was going to say.
Oh, you're good. Yes.
Stay there.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thanks. Awesome. Is that the full screen now? Like the slideshow version?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. Thanks for checking that. So just for the sake of time, we can go ahead and get started, especially given this is the last session on a Friday. So first of all, we're just super grateful that y'all are here. This is the Addressing Equity in WAC, a story of anti-racist writing pedagogy at an HSI university. And we will start with a land acknowledgement, as that is an essential part of our practice and our thinking about anti-racist and equity work. And so we are located in Tucson, Arizona, which is home of the Tono, O'odham, and Pasco Yaqui indigenous tribes since time immemorial. Additionally, Clemson University is on the lands of the Cherokee and people enslaved by the Pickens, Clemson, and Calhoun families. And so this legacy is perpetuated in the work that we do. And we will be calling back to anti-colonialism throughout our conversation, but we want to start there as most of the work we do is contextualized and rooted in place. And I will go ahead and introduce myself first and then pass it over to my two co-presenters. So I'm Emily Jo Schwaller. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an assistant professor of practice in our Teaching and Learning Center at the University of Arizona. And I will pass it to the award-winning Dr. Amy Mapes, who was recognized at lunch today.
Oh, aloha. Thank you, Emily Jo. My name is Amy Mapes. I'm the Director of Writing Across the Curriculum at the University of Arizona. And I'd like to acknowledge that right now I'm a guest on the island of Maui, Hawaii, for a family celebration. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the island on which my family has gathered is part of the larger territory of Indigenous Hawaiians. And I recognize that these territories remain an illegally occupied state of America. I am grateful as a guest and seek to support the varied strategies that Indigenous peoples of Hawaii use to protect land and their community. And I will pass it off to Leah Bowser.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Leah Bowser. I use she, her pronouns. I am the embedded tutoring coordinator, graduate assistant in the Think Tank Writing Center here at the University of Arizona. And I'm excited to share our work with you all today and hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy and Leah. And for those who have items they want to put in the chat, Leah will be monitoring those comments and posting links. Additionally, there should be a handout for those who would like one, and the QR code will lead you to some of the materials as well. But I'm going to pass it over to Amy to kind of situate our work.
Yes, thanks again. Mahalo for those of you who are able to join us today virtually or present with Emily Jo. We are grateful for your time, and we are grateful for the labor of the folks who are helping to coordinate this conference. So about our work, you're going to listen to three of us describe 2 years of supporting equity-minded writing pedagogy at the University of Arizona. And we think it's wise to provide some information about that context so that you can identify the ways in which your own institutional situation might align with ours, or perhaps suggest different ways to approach equity work. So we are a public R1 state university, a land grant institution founded in 1885, funded in part by land seizure, recently designated as a Hispanic serving institution in the Southwest, and an American Indian and Alaskan Native serving institution. And there is a link there for you to learn more about federally recognized communities this institution is supposed to serve. And Emily Jo will talk a bit more about the ways in which we do this well, and maybe opportunities for learning. Next slide. Some reminders about the socio-political context in Arizona, and we feel that those of you in South Carolina and in other states may recognize some similar conversations. Our state superintendent of schools, Tom Horn, recently declared, and in a glorified way, that his goal is to, quote, eradicate teaching on diversity and equity, and eliminate the use of social emotional learning in Arizona schools. So we find ourselves in Tucson, a university town in the larger Arizona, working against some of the broader political context at the state level. Next slide. And we recognize that that is also risky work for many of us. More about our students. This is an HSI student enrollment. We serve over 40,000 undergraduate students. Half of those identify as Arizona residents. We also serve 3.3% American Indian, 9% Asian students, around 7% that identify as Black or African American, and 27% that identify Hispanic or Latinx, which, as you can see, what's not visible here is that we could be argued to be a predominantly white institution and white serving institution, and that's another facet of our work. Next slide. Our WAC efforts as an initiative depends on institutional collaboration across some important units, and that includes the University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology, and that is where Emily Jo Schwaller's position is most likely supported and funded. We work closely with the think tank, which is our student support service on campus, within which the Writing Center resides, and that's where Leah Bowser is funded. The Office of General Education, it's a new office on campus helping to support a significant revision of general education on campus. And the funding for writing across the curriculum is very much housed in general education. We're hopeful that some of you might see this as the kind of experience you have with writing across the curriculum at your own institutions. Next. And more about our attempt with equity work I wanted to remind you that we have a number of initiatives that we're navigating and are using as leverage to provide resources to sustain this kind of work. And sometimes it's a lot to accomplish with good and bad results. We are talking mostly today about our work with a CARES-funded project for vertical anti-racist WAC work. And there are two important prongs of that project. It was funded internally through our provost office. It was a competitive grant cycle, and it provided 2 years of funding for first WAC faculty fellows training. And secondly, for those faculty who would be receiving WAC training and continued support with how to integrate writing across the curriculum into their courses, we would coordinate embedded tutoring with the Writing Center. And you can see on the slide here some of the initiatives that or projects that aligned with both of these prongs or aspects of that initiative. Simultaneously, we were supporting efforts in our revised general education curriculum. So one key revision is change to how we describe curriculum categories. Students are now taking courses to explore perspectives across the curriculum and sort of these meta disciplines like social sciences, natural sciences, fine arts, humanities. They are also taking courses in building connections, and the idea is to highlight perspective taking, interdisciplinary knowledge making, and integrating some of these points of view for more creative, imaginative responses to real world problems. And attributes can be identified in any of these curricular categories. There are 4 courses that identify as doing difference, equity, inclusion work, courses that are highlighting quantitative reasoning, courses with world cultures as an important aspect of their objectives, and writing. Some courses carry the writing attribute, which means that a good deal of their engagement relies on writing in some fashion. So hopefully that helps you see like the larger context within which we are trying to do some of this equity work. Next slide. And one of our key objectives is to expose what we refer to at times a monolingual language standard in the academy. On this slide, we have a series of quotes or citations that help define what we mean by this phrase. We have seen in WAC work that faculty default to good writing as this general skill that transfers neutrally, often just described as clear and concise. But we've learned in recent scholarship that that neutral conception of literacy sort of reinforces a white mainstream language ideology. And what that involves is, firstly, there is a monolingualism as an ideal at the exclusion of other varieties. There is a trope of language correctness that becomes a mechanism of sanctioning white dispositions, which is at the expense or sacrifice of brown and Black students. That white mainstream English is used as the gold standard at an unstated norm. Like it's just perceived as that's the norm, and we want to make it explicit. We really want to lessen the fact that this is a norm that's unstated. And finally, that these language standards and judgments promote a type of white language supremacy. So some of the first kind of work we want to do is that critical work, where how do you expose this hidden legacy? And when does that work well, and when can we kind of learn from our missteps as part of what our presentation is doing today? Next slide. To do this labor, to provide tools to faculty once they come to understand monolingualism as a language standard that's unmarked in the academy, we draw from principles of equity work that are outlined by Jeff Duncan Andretti, who is a teacher scholar, professor at Cal State University, San Francisco, and does amazing work in the Oakland Unified School District to support literacy and positive kinds of experiences with community engaged learning. And these tenets of 3 R's are 3 nouns: relationships, relevance, and responsibility. And we see each of these as opportunities for how we design both what's assignments we ask faculty or help faculty to produce, and how do we approach different conversations on campus about this work. Relationships means caring relations between teachers and their students. Like, part of learning is having a relationship. It's hard to do that labor if you have a large class. So sometimes we're just struggling with that particular component all the time. Relevance. How do we connect our courses to students' lives, communities, families, and ethnic, cultural, linguistic histories? How do we allow those to be brought in as valuable, valid, with parity to the knowledge we're providing to them? And then finally, responsibility. When are the moments that we can challenge systemic inequities? What are the little ways we can try to dismantle those inequities so that over time we are moving beyond them? So that's some of the principles that inform a lot of the work we're going to share with you today. Next slide. And feel free to interrupt me, Leah and or Emily Jo, if there are questions. Okay. As I said, Emily Jo will share more about, I think, some of the missteps we've made and talk a lot about what's happened in the second year of this work. I am going to focus a lot on year 1, which was 21-22 of this work, and how we worked with faculty, while Leah Bowser is going to focus on embedded tutoring specifically. How did we coordinate that experience? And the title of my presentation, More Inclusive and Meaningful Learning Experiences, comes from an exit interview we had with the first cohort after we tried out WAC training with an anti-racist or equity-minded lens. Next slide. Thank you. What I argue here is that introducing anti-racist writing pedagogy is like working with a threshold concept. And you probably are familiar with this term. Jan Meyer and Raymond Land, define threshold concepts as ideas that people new to a discipline must come to know. People experience this as a process of moving through a threshold in thinking, after which they are fundamentally changed. And that threshold, that liminal space where you're struggling to come to terms with this new concept, can also be very affective, meaning there are emotional dimensions being involved in this. And some of the insights we learned after 2 years of this work is that helping faculty to recognize the presence of a norm regarding neutral language standards as themselves being harmful is a difficult lesson to come to terms with. And I'm going to share what we learned in year 1 from a couple of faculty members who navigated this troublesome concept quite well. Next slide. I'm borrowing a bit here, not borrowing, I'm forwarding the work of Tessa Brown, who articulated pretty capably in an article published in 2020 in 3Cs that there are a few more threshold concepts we might want to highlight and amplify and add to the work that Linda Adler-Kasner and Liz Wardle had already established in their really significant edited collection, Naming What We Know. So I've listed on the slide here the principles that we've understood from Naming What We Know. Writing is social and rhetorical. Writing speaks to situations through recognizable forms, i.e. genre there. Writing enacts and creates identities and ideologies. And writing is also always a cognitive activity. Tessa Brown argues that in addition to these concepts, we need to bring urgent attention to language as a political endeavor. And she offers 3 more sort of threshold concepts to consider: that language rights and privileges are always political. Language choices are made in multilingual contexts. So the idea is that all contexts are multilingual. And language users engage all of their linguistic resources when making spoken and written language choices. And students have a right to learn and communicate in all their languages. And she's drawing pretty extensively on students' right to their own language. So some of the early work in the 70s, and then our commitment and recommitment to those efforts in the recent decade. Next slide, please. So in short, as Tessa Brown has argued that we need to pay more fervent attention to linguistic justice, I'm suggesting that it may help when we do anti-racist work to think about this kind of equity work as involving a very uncomfortable, potentially a place of resistance, learning space. And I explore how in 2 cases, there were a couple of tools provided that seemed to help faculty navigate that discomfort and then figure out ways to make changes that felt feasible and meaningful to them in the year that they began teaching that course with revised assignments. And I look at specifically how audience and assessment became those promising tools to revise writing assignments for relevance, right? For connecting to students' communities. Next slide. This slide explains some of what we accomplished in year 1, that we had a summer 2-week hybrid workshop. It ended up being synchronous online because this was COVID time. And we followed that with individual check-ins, fall large group check-ins, spring interviews, and all the while there was embedded tutoring support and check-ins that Leah helped to coordinate and take lead on. Next slide. And while a lot happened in those 2 weeks in that first year, I'm going to highlight exclusively what it was like for some of the WAC fellows to be exposed to this information. So here are reflections shared by our WAC faculty fellows in their exit interviews based on reading Asao Inoue's blog work and April Baker Bell's a couple of chapters from her text. And they describe how it felt. In the first quote, "These texts exposed my own assumptions about my own linguistic neutrality." So there's this internal need to evaluate and assess, like, what have you seen as a norm and how might you have to navigate that? The second quote, "I had not heard the term white mainstream language. I was surprised by how radical it was." So this is a fellow who came in feeling as if they were already doing a lot of equity work. And I think we're surprised to see that the equity work wasn't actually enough at this point in time. And then finally, "I was brought up in a world where science is race blind." So here's a WAC fellow who was like, it's not an issue because science is race blind. And so they were really grappling with, what do you do if that's not true? You've taken that to be the norm and how you approach things, and you have to rethink everything. It's a bit unsettling. Next slide. So finally, we have a couple of quotes from a few members that really capture this discomfort. From Animal Sciences, this WAC fellow shared, "It was intense and hard to be thinking about the idea of unintentional harm to students." Notice that, like, unintentional harm. "And it was hard to trust everyone in the group, to be honest with my own feelings. So how to process this with people who you were new to, that also added a layer of discomfort." And then another level comes from classics. And this is one that I really align with a lot. "I was feeling despair. There's just so much to do, and being overwhelmed by the system," right? Like, how do you navigate it if it's so all-encompassing, so pervasive? And finally, from business, "Once we started doing the readings, it challenged me. There was a lot of discomfort, but the reading was generative and helpful over time." So next slide. All this to say that it's important to recognize our equity work is probably troublesome work as well. And lots of people tell us this all the time, but I think we need to recognize, how do you account for that as part of the process? And perhaps the missteps of year 2, which Emily Jo, I think, will capably describe, could have been handled more if we had thought about the troublesomeness more and made space for where resistance could be manifest, allowed it to be exhibited, and worked through in a trustworthy, supportive space. Thankfully, we learned that audience and assessment, some tools for working with these key terms or principles in WAC work, seem to provide some solace for a couple of our members. And I know I'm taking a long time, so maybe I'm going to go a little fast here. Next slide. In example 1, we learned from a colleague in public health that given the kind of work they do in their discipline, audience is key, because we're constantly writing for communities. And so they designed an entire assignment where students had to grapple with what that audience might be, what choices you would make with language given that audience, and they would all be writing to slightly different audiences. So students themselves were allowed to choose. And in that endeavor, this faculty fellow felt as if defining the audience in these relevant ways, very situated ways, became equity practice. I can answer more about that if we have time in the end. Next slide. The second example comes from microbiology and animal sciences. And there were 2 lessons here in terms of linguistic justice. This is a slide actually that I copied from a presentation this WAC fellow gave during our second year end of year celebration. And in their discussion, this WAC fellow described how they eliminated terms clear and argued that clear, what it means to me is not always the same. Not everybody is writing the same, and that academic English is not spoken or used uniformly. So how to do that in a way where students could still learn the expectations for writing a scientific article in microbiology became very important for him. He also said it was important to create low stakes writing where students could express themselves, really to amplify or show value to non-academic English or varieties of language that didn't always typify the scientific writing they were reading. Next slide. And one other shift he made in the major project, they made in the major project of this course, was to include a type of grading contract for their main writing assignment, where features of the genre were identified and students practiced it all semester long. And basically they received credit if that feature showed up. So if they followed whatever form was identified, they got credit. It was clear that they were following a sense of audience, credit. The goal then was helping them to pay attention to the moves, the expectations of their scientific genre, but not to evaluate something like clarity or concision, completely eliminating those as descriptors in the rubric. Next slide, please. All that to say, what worked well for these two folks is that they were able to deal with and navigate the discomfort of being exposed to this concept that like language isn't neutral, it's political. Reflecting at different points in time was very helpful for them, each identifying that they experienced a type of crisis, right? Have I always been doing this wrong kind of thing? But with the right support, they were able to subtly make changes and feel like they were making a difference while also looking for ways to continue to improve over time. And that is helping, usually in terms of their assignment revision, was highlighting the relevance. How can we connect to students' communities and really uplift and amplify the knowledges they bring with them? Next slide. There were lots of instructive lessons, especially in year 2. Again, there are times there was some resistance, regression. Not everybody moved through the threshold. And we can talk more about missteps that may have contributed to that. But for those two, audience and assessment seemed to be tools that really felt manageable for them to take on equity work. Last slide, I believe. There are some future goals on how do we do this a little bit better next time. Localizing our writing across the curriculum a bit more would be helpful. Embracing this equity language work as an important threshold concept in writing studies, as argued by Tessa Brown. And with that, I thank you for your patience and I pass it off to Emily Jo.
Awesome. We'll clap for you, Amy. Awesome. Woohoo. So I'm going to be talking about year 2, which was a little bit more challenging for a wide range of reasons. But to return to these 3 R's of equity, the one that I'm really focusing on for year 2, which was our big missed opportunity, is responsibility. So challenging systemic inequities, both within ourselves, our programming, and our institution. And so we are, as Amy stated, within an environment that is increasingly anti-DEI. This is the Chronicle of Higher Ed's DEI legislation tracker from June 1st. And since capturing this, there have been 2 new legislations proposed that are anti-DEI. Yet despite this, the rapid growth of Hispanic serving institutions is just so robust. So this stops in 2019, and since then there's now 571 Hispanic serving institutions, with 401 emerging as HSIs. And so what that means is HSIs have a total full-time enrollment, 25% of students that identify as Latinx. So that does not include the part-time students who identify. And so as we've been talking about throughout this conference, with 50 years of WAC, HSI initiatives actually started similarly around the same time conversationally and have exponentially grown. So as we're thinking about the future, thinking about the fact that it's almost going to double in the next 10 to 15 years, I think is important for the work that we are doing, especially at our institution. Despite the growth of HSIs, funding has not grown proportionally. And over 60% of HSIs are R1 institutions who receive a majority of the funding, despite the efforts being started to support community colleges. So this is a colonized space largely in its funding models, which we contributed to in various ways through our grant activities, trying to do our WAC work. And so that's one of the spaces and tensions in which we're trying to suss out how we can do this work without contributing to this colonial practice. Additionally, our institution has a very white-centric valuing of outputs for our HSI that deal with enrollment and retention, which we oftentimes align ourselves with to get funding. And these can allude to things such as belonging and connection, but you'll notice what's missing here is percentage of scholarship or financial support for students, other options, avenues, and our embedded tutoring program is really a wonderful illustration of doing this work well, that Leah is going to talk about next. But this white-centric approach is really highlighted in Jamil Karim's work in Composition Forum that came out last month, but it illustrates this prevalent narrative that we're trying to get students through quickly and enroll them rather than serve them. So what does the servingness mean? According to our institution, servingness is defined as engaging Latina, Latino, Latinx students through culturally enhancing equitable approaches that offer transformative experiences leading to both academic and non-academic outcomes. So what we were trying to do is think about how our WAC program's anti-racist approach could lead to transformative experiences academically, while also bringing those non-academic identities and making it relevant for our participants. However, we faced multiple challenges. We started in 2021, so there was a lot of burnout because of COVID-19 already. And we ended up largely with what we might call the coalition of the willing, who already engage in a lot of professional development work and are already doing a lot of labor. Additionally, these are folks who have less job stability and are oftentimes not recognized for the professional development they're doing. Additionally, writing studies, which includes a wide range of things, but WAC is embedded in that, has a history of whiteness, and in a way says white people can perpetuate white supremacy just by being present. And this was led by 3 white women. And so we were complicit in problems with servingness and not drawing more attention to that, and thinking systematically about what that meant for what we were trying to do. Additionally, there was a ton of institutional needs with the rollout of the new general education. And so instead of allowing faculty fellows to really build their own projects and agency, we were trying to align it with the new general education curriculum so that we could resist some of the overextension in labor, but it ended up serving these white-centric institutional needs rather than serving our students. And so what this looked like is, again, we had a 2-week curriculum in the summer, first on anti-racism and what WAC principles are, and then implementing an assignment design, most likely for the new gen ed. We also had individual check-ins. We had developed principles for writing at HSIs, which we'll look at, and then we had various coalition events and embedded tutoring support. And the coalition events ended up being some of our most successful because it included WAC fellows from year 1 who had a more transformative experience than those in year 2. And so the coalition events ended up being a really productive space. As we've heard throughout the conference, eventually folks want to stop hearing from the WAC people and start hearing from those in their disciplines or similar disciplines. So it made sense that that became an opportunity to do that. However, within these tensions, there was, as Amy mentioned, this threshold concept of not only WAC principles, but just of teaching and learning in general. Ideas around scaffolding were revolutionary. And so to try and get to that and then be like, oh, and anti-racism was incredibly challenging. And we ended up having to really water down some things. And what I actually mean there probably is whitewash a lot of things because we were focused on other teaching and learning practices. And within that, we did not call in participants when we should have because of some of the feedback we got from year 1 of being hesitant to share, but then we enabled that hesitancy by allowing folks to share everything, even when it was problematic. And then we did not make as clear our program outcomes and how they aligned with being an HSI. And we ended up doing exactly what we don't want to do, which is focus on this end product of an assignment for general education rather than the process of getting there and grappling with these threshold concepts. And then a really great illustration of this from year 2 is reflections from the summer session. So there was 167 posts on D2L, which is our learning management system. 0 mentioned being an HSI, our student population, anything about our student makeup, even though that was something we talked about. No mentions of positionality. And this is largely our fault because we might have mentioned our positionality, but didn't interrogate it in a way that made it seem not neutral. Instead, we neutralized our whiteness and made that seem like the default, which is extremely problematic and led to our WAC fellows not having language, modeling, or space to reflect in their own ways about that. And then there were only 2 mentions of students' race, and it was completely about students who were Chinese TAs in the class. So nothing at all about our student population. That said, even though it was a more challenging year, we had some positives, largely because of our year 1 fellows. So our coalition has about 45 members now, and it includes all the folks on campus who support writing. So that could be our writing center, graduate college, teaching and learning center, general education, the writing program, and all of these different spaces. And those efforts ended up being a space where some of the first year fellows could share out things about audience and student agency and relevance that were useful for the larger community to hear. And then within that, really we turned to this concept of threshold concepts to really try and get folks to be able to grasp and develop some of what we might think of as WAC 101. And that ended up being a space where folks got a little bit more support on. And then we did develop these principles of supporting students at an HSI, which we'll showcase right now. So this is from Venegas et al.'s C's Roundtable, where they proposed the top 12 ways to support Latinx student success in your writing class. And we adapted this by taking each of the principles and then adding actionable steps that professors could do. So we have like a little abstract about what is this? What do we mean by metacognition? And then what are maybe 3 or 4 ways you can build metacognition into your course? And this provided a lot of useful framing for folks because they could see it in action. However, it also created a lot of new language like culturally responsive pedagogy, affective needs, and they became theory overloaded, which became a problem. And so Garcia just had a new book come out on what it means to be an HSI. And she writes, I call on HSIs, and I would say everyone, to reconsider the approach to everything we do. We cannot define and enact servingness in practice through grant activities that are grounded in white normativity and disconnected from the identities and lived experiences of Latinx students within HSIs. So this call to really think about when we propose grants and we end up in a situation like what we did, how can we actually swerve to focus on the servingness aspect and not just the survivingness of gen ed and some of the institutional ideas? There was a wonderful presentation earlier today that talked about the romanticizing of resistance and how that puts the onus largely on the individuals. So this was Sherry Craig mentioning this, rather than thinking systemically, what are we doing? And so that is kind of what we are hoping to turn to moving forward, is recentering on servingness and the systemic issues rather than putting the onus on the individual instructor who is still grappling with just what it means to do WAC work in general. And so we're hoping to reshape our program learning outcomes, empower fellows with agency over their own projects. And one of the ways we also want to do this is by having department heads or deans nominate folks to engage in this program to help legitimize and illustrate the importance of this work, as well as create dialogue about why they shouldn't have to do other PD labor if they're already engaging in this meaningful work. And then having sustained conversation and calling in on our own whiteness and what that means as we continue grant funding. We also want to think about recentering servingness in WAC. There are no current HSI working groups, statements, any sort of caucus, anything like that from C's, CWPA, WAC in general. And yet in the next 10 years, we might have 900 institutions that are HSIs. And so this is something we really call upon. There has been a lot of recent publications, which is very exciting, specifically last month. And then we also are thinking about what are these new threshold concepts that Brown alludes to in terms of languaging. TM and Walshmar also talk about indigenous ways of knowing as threshold concepts that could also be considered as we're redefining that. And then how do we tease out what are threshold concepts for students and which are threshold concepts for faculty? Where do they align and where do faculty need specific support in over to understand not only teaching and learning, but also WAC and anti-racism, and definitely not in that order. And so I'm excited to turn it over to the most serving centered part of our entire program, which was embedded tutoring, which is a delightful equitable practice that I can't wait for you to hear about.
Yes, thank you, Emily Jo. Yes, my presentation is going to be about our embedded tutoring program. It's called Hanging Out with a Friend, which comes from a quote from a student's survey response, and how we do see this as an opportunity for more equitable writing support we hope to continue developing. Next slide, please. So to get started, framing our endeavor going into this program is this quote from Yi talking about writing as a high impact practice and high impact practices in general, and the need to go beyond our current model to better support especially marginalized students. I do see us in writing centers often focusing on how to get students to come to the writing center or choose to use our services without bringing a lot of attention to the underlying questions of access and the need to look at barriers that students face, especially those related to systemic oppression for our marginalized students. These obstacles can be everything from not understanding the hidden curriculum of, just cultural expectations and college norms, to us not considering the additional labor, time, and resources required to get support outside of the classroom. And so one strategy Yi offers here in this quote is to think about how to more effectively take advantage of classroom time and classroom spaces where students already are. And so how do we go to the students to reduce some of those barriers and really address their needs? So that's what we hope our embedded tutoring program is working towards answering this call. And we'll outline ways that we've tried to do this. Next slide. Great. So our overall framework for the program, we really wanted to highlight a peer-to-peer dynamic. Our writing tutors that supported these undergraduate courses were undergraduate students themselves. We sought to keep our collaborative, low-stakes approach that we hope our writing center embodies. Thus, they were not involved in any evaluation or any work that might be more of a TA. They were kept as, peer tutors in the space, and they were also not required to take the class or be in the major that the class fell within in order to support it. So our tutors came from all different disciplines, and they were current writing tutors that we recruited for this project. So to help faculty and tutors understand our model a little bit better, we gave them this chart along with a whole quick start guide that you can find linked in our handout and in our resource folder, where we just tried to outline this idea of they will not be, evaluating or proofreading. They will also not be expected to do all of the homework or all of the readings or any of the assignments themselves. They attended in class for in-person classes and engaged in the LMS for online classes. But really, we wanted to continue highlighting that they were contributing to discussions around writing and supporting the students first and foremost in the writing process. And the next slide shows the variety of ways we tried to do that. And how many students we served. So the way this shaped each year was 3 to 7 class sections a semester and 6 to 7 tutors across those. All in all, the last 2 years, we've supported over 1,100 students in these classes. And you can see the range of disciplines there listed on the right, from classics to business communication, fashion to immunology. These were the classes taught by the WAC faculty fellows that we got to see tutors engaging with this wide variety of content and seeing where they fit and how they could best support students in these spaces. Next slide. Great. So we supported both in-person and online asynchronous modalities for these courses. And we learned a lot trying to adapt to each, and we have a lot more we can do there. I'll touch on later. But the types of support we offered aligned with our typical writing center services of one-on-one or group sessions via Zoom or in person or our asynchronous modality. We also then, tutors were facilitating workshops in class. They were recording workshops to upload to the classroom site. They were also engaging with students in the classroom or via email alongside the sessions. They in class participated in writing discussions, and then in the online asynchronous courses, they would be involved in voice threads or discussion boards. In the last year too, we've really gone deeper into developing student-facing asynchronous resources, including a type that we called tutor tips this last spring, where tutors created a resource with information and guidance for the upcoming assignment. And then attached to it was usually 1 or 2 quiz questions that had unlimited attempts, but just helped students think through some of the materials. And then finally, we developed a new service called Technique Building Sessions for our asynchronous online courses, especially where this was a synchronous Zoom space where tutors would present some information and then lead the students through activities, time to work on assignments, time for questions and discussion. And we'd offer these at a few different times in a week with the same content, and then record these and upload them to the classroom site as well, so that students who are not able to attend at those times could still engage with the materials in some ways. Next slide. And so with all of these different types of support, we did really see alignment with literature on embedded tutoring. Carpenter et al. Highlights here the multifaceted role of embedded tutors that I'll go into a little bit more in the next slide. But just this idea that tutors, yes, they're there to support the students and hopefully a less authoritative one-on-one connection, but really the benefits for faculty as well, where tutors are an additional perspective. They're engaging with students in a way faculty typically are not, and thus have insights and observations to bring to faculty members and help the faculty member better develop their class, resources, and support their own students. Next slide. So for us, this tutor role took on that of a liaison in a lot of ways. We saw them, communicating between students and the instructor. And there in that second row, we saw them translating the assignments and instructor expectations to students in sessions, in class, via email. We circulated a survey in spring 2022 that I'll be highlighting a lot of responses from, where 44% of the students who responded said that the tutors helped them even understand the assignment prompt or guidelines. And thus we saw that as tutors working to remove barriers that prevented the students from even getting started with the assignment. And that being an empowering way into the assignment for students. And then, like I mentioned, tutors would meet with faculty members and also email them to bring specific student questions, those observations, and other notes to faculty members. And faculty expressed that they were very grateful for this feedback and that they used it and will continue to use it in future iterations of the course. In some cases, they pushed back deadlines or took more time in class or circulated extra information to students. And so then we did really see this like as students receiving questions, receiving answers to questions they might not have felt comfortable taking to a faculty member, those benefits of the faculty being able to address those concerns. And then also even the students who didn't maybe engage with us or bring those questions to us or the faculty, they still got the additional information and hopefully additional support going into the assignment. So yes, positive benefits from that liaison role. Next slide. And so now thinking about feedback we got from that student survey I mentioned, and then interviews from our tutors, we did see ways in which embedded writing tutoring seemed to be enabling this more equitable writing support, and things we're really excited about that emerged from it, including this idea of increased awareness and access to writing support for students, and then also just this lower power distance peer-to-peer relationship leading to a lot of positive outcomes such as students overcoming some discomfort around writing, hopefully shifting their mindset around writing support, and then maybe coming back in the future or seeking out writing support in different ways. So to dive into this in more depth, here on the next slide, we have broken down this increased access and awareness. First, we saw our integration into course spaces as key. This was especially evident in our in-person classes, and we're trying to figure out ways to make it more prevalent in our online asynchronous courses as well. This came in the form of tutors facilitating those workshops and activities, and also opportunities for students to talk to the tutors, both during class, during those times, but also we saw students stopping tutors before and after class. And these were students asking questions, but also tutors had the chance to follow up on feedback they'd given. Students got to ask additional questions about revisions. And then it was just a form of checking in and building relationships there. And then also our offering of asynchronous options was especially popular in that students were able to submit their writing to our scheduling sheet, and then tutors offered feedback asynchronously. So students submitted, tutors offered that feedback and sent it to them, and then students still had the opportunity to revise their writing and resubmit for another appointment. They could also respond to the comments that tutors left, ask more questions, and then they could also schedule a synchronous follow-up appointment to go over feedback or revisions as well. So lots of opportunities there that ideally don't require a lot of extra time, especially like specific time within a schedule that students have to set aside to make sure they get the support. So evidence of this in our next slide, we saw, especially in the student survey, and then we saw that in our question where we asked, in what ways did you receive support from embedded tutoring? The top 4 choices were related to in-class interactions or asynchronous support. And so first and foremost, participating in in-class presentation, asking the question or getting up for other help from them during class, and then submitting that feedback loop request. And so really following these options, we see that these were typically the ones that required the least amount of time and labor outside of the classroom or additional asks for student resources. And then this was further exemplified in the quote here on the next slide, where in an open-ended question, a student highlighted that the feedback loop process is incredibly convenient and so helpful. I hope it will remain in place for the embedded tutoring program. So really seeing it as a great option for students, especially who need this asynchronous format, and the convenience there, you know, increasing the access and removing some of those barriers we might see with other types of support. And then finally, we asked the question at the end, what additional services would improve embedded tutoring? And of the options we provided, the top 2 choices were in-class time related. So more in-class workshops, more in-class time to get help from the tutors. And this was further exemplified in this quote. It was so nice that the tutor knew all of our assignments and was physically in class with us. It made it a lot easier to ask questions and ask for help. And so seeing that these in-person, in-class interactions were so helpful and convenient, we really did try to think, how can we replicate this for online asynchronous courses? So going into year 2, that fall, we created embedded tutoring Gmail accounts that the students were given, and we saw a lot of in-class we saw a lot of interactions through those in ways that, again, it was easier for students to send an email than find a specific time to meet with a tutor in some cases. And then we've also seen in our technique building sessions where it is a space that students, even in online asynchronous classes, can meet. We see them asking questions and engaging and getting new ideas in those spaces as well. And so in the next slide, we break down the other half of the results that we saw, especially related to relationships and lower power distance. This we saw connecting back to those 3 R's of equity as well, the relationship component that highlights caring relationships between students and their instructors. But really, we also saw these caring relationships between students and the tutors as especially prominent in our findings. And so one part of this was a course-long relationship building opportunity. In this case, tutors reported in interviews increased rapport with students, more opportunities to build trusting relationships across the duration of the course. And then on the student side, even just looking at our sessions, we saw repeat sessions, students coming back after their first time to continue to develop that relationship and get feedback throughout the course. And then another key facet of this for us was the peer-to-peer dynamic with undergraduate tutors supporting these undergraduate classes. And as I'll show in findings in the next few slides, this lower power distance seemed to really break down barriers around feelings of anxiety or discomfort related to writing in ways that we were really excited about. So the next slide is a tutor interview response that I felt really highlighted how the tutor, I asked what their approach was to supporting the class and students. And they said even from day one, they were trying to highlight the peer-to-peer relationships, even in their introduction. They admitted to the class, I'm not an expert in public health, which was the subject of this course, but I do, have some training in writing. And I'm a student just like you, so I'm happy to meet with you. That's why I'm here. And then they ended with just highlighting that their goal is to get to know these students as people and first and foremost have that kind of dynamic with them. And then in our student survey, we saw similarly encouraging responses from students that highlighted the value of this peer-to-peer model. Students thinking about tutors as more approachable than instructors, the tutors creating caring spaces, the students already being familiar with the tutors and that breaking down some barriers. And then hopefully, this seeing some shifting feelings around writing. And we hope that this encourages them to, use the Writing Center again. And if we're able to embed this in more classes, use embedded writing tutoring support in other ways. And I just wanted to highlight a few aspects of these. The first one highlighting how their own feelings around asking for help have kept them from reaching out in the past, but this being embedded into the course and encouraged helped them overcome that. The second highlighting that this felt less intimidating to them. And then the third saying how comfortable it felt to meet with the tutor. And this is where the title comes from, where the student said, I would have bad anxiety before, but the tutor made it very easy and comfortable. It felt like I was hanging out with a friend, which again was so encouraging and something we hope is something we can foster in our Writing Center and in these classes. And so to wrap this up, I've highlighted a lot of the positives, but just like with everything, there were also some challenges. The first and foremost, I've mentioned about finding strategies for meaningful engagement in online asynchronous courses. Like I said, we've tried some forms of email, those tutor tips, the technique building sessions, but realizing there's a lot more room there. And these students, without the synchronous component to the class already, maybe needing even more opportunities to get that writing support especially. The second related especially to year 2, where we've highlighted the mindset of the instructors. We did have more instructors framing this service or the program as a remedial or punitive thing in their classes. Especially, we had one instructor requiring visits for multilingual students, especially like singling them out. We also had instructors framing it as the tutors are here for those of you who really struggle. And one of our goals with the embedded tutoring program was to say, this class has a lot of writing and embedded peer feedback is a valuable practice for all students. So that's why we're here for everyone. And then really here, this relates to, we definitely could have been doing some more work of calling in these instructors more proactively or working with them to dismantle some of this deficit mindset that they were bringing into their courses and thus putting onto the embedded tutoring program itself. And then finally relates to labor. Year 1, we were a little bit more hands-off and realized that in year 2, when we had more hands-on coordination, faculty were able to implement the embedded tutoring in more effective ways. That just took a lot more labor on our part. And so trying to find a balance of coordination labor while also making sure faculty feel prepared and like it's being integrated well. And then we will be thinking about ways to do that in the future. So our final slide here shows our future goals, continuing to develop what seems to be working well. Some of those things I highlighted of the relationship building, the peer-to-peer dynamic, the increased access. What are ways we can capitalize on that more, really develop it out and increase it? Also refining types of support, like I mentioned, for online asynchronous courses. Our goal coming out of this pilot is to develop a scalable, sustainable program, especially for general education courses and writing emphasis classes. And that will take some work. We've gotten some funding to support another class in the fall in general education. So again, just hoping to make this something we can argue as a valuable resource to continue doing. And then finally, designing and implementing training for faculty so that that is one of the ways they can feel more prepared, one of the ways we can dismantle some of the deficit mindset and help them understand our ethos. And then going forward, just in general, hoping the tutor or the students get supported more effectively in those ways. And so that's all we have. Our final slide is just saying thank you to you and offering our email addresses. But I'll be watching the chat if anyone wants to put questions in Whova. And then we also, this QR code will take you to our resource folder. And then the links I put in Whova will also take you to it as well. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah. Yay. So we have about 8 minutes, and I know folks are so tired. It's Friday and almost dinner, and we're so grateful that you hung in there with us. But are there any questions or comments or anything else? Similar struggles?
Hi, folks. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name's Chris Elder. I'm a professor at the University of New Mexico, so I'm neighbor. And of course, University of New Mexico is an HSI, but we have the advantage of a less hostile political environment. So I'm just curious how you all deal with that in your day-to-day or at your institution. Is there discussion about how to address policy at a state level or anything like that? And obviously it's possible you have enough going on within your own departments and institutions, but I'm just curious.
That's a great question. I can get us started, and then if Amy wants to jump in. I know for me, this has been less prevalent in our WAC work, except for what we name things, like DEI versus anti-racist versus linguistic justice or monolingualism. But I know in the Teaching and Learning Center, which I represent, and someone in our center was going to publish an article about diversity and inclusion statements in syllabi and was asked not to. And so I think we will be having a conversation about that. But the reason why was because they weren't sure what they should say or what guidance they would want when reporters started calling, because it is something that is an issue right now. And so that's from my center, has been blocking it to put communication in order, but in doing that is really just stalling it at a time when it's really necessary. Amy, I saw you unmuted.
Sure. I want to echo that in our WAC efforts, probably because our upper administration doesn't really care what we're doing. No, does that sound awful? It probably does. We use this. We use this as a space to, or at least I do, to be a point of resistance, but also under the radar in spaces where there is a little more oversight in the gen ed curriculum specifically. Our principals argue that students bring in strong varieties and linguistic repertoires and all gen ed courses with a writing attribute and need to be ready to support those students. We have some guidance in terms of assessment and how we can't overly assess students who write with linguistic varieties or dialects. And those are little nudges that we do, but at the civic education requirement, our Board of Regents is very much mandating a policy that is antithetical to linguistic justice or any kind of equity work. So it's sort of a push and pull. And we have a group of folks who would support us. And then there are a couple of voices at the upper admin and at the legislative space that are not going to. In fact, I think the Writing Center was called out by our Vice Provost for Academic Affairs because peer tutors were reading about anti-racist Writing Center tutoring, and there was a lot of concern over that. So I think knowing that this is where I think my whiteness is useful because I'm just up there as an accomplice and going to make missteps and try to call people out when I can. And I'm much more comfortable calling out people who are my superiors than I am when I'm training them as a WAC fellow. So that's something I got to work on. And that was long-winded. Thank you for that question, though.
I would also jump in and say that's one of the reasons I think aligning as an HSI is a better strategy, because they want the money that comes with being an HSI. And so even though to upper admin folks that might just mean enrolling, what we can then do is say, no, we're gonna use this to serve, but aligning with that language might be kind of our future approach because it's more strategic and they want that visibility. Other questions? Or Leah, did you want to jump in at all? Okay, nope. Other questions, thoughts? I will say shout out to New Mexico as being one of the HSI starters in a positive way in the 70s. So, woohoo! But are there any questions in the chat, Leah? No, cool. Awesome. Well, this QR code has all of our info for those in person. We have handouts and yeah, we hope, especially those also at HSIs, we can connect and think about the implications of this work further. And we just really appreciate y'all being here. And thank you to our tech help for just being the best. And yes, we hope to continue learning with you all. Thanks. Thanks, Leah and Amy. Huzzah.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
I know, right?